Picture this. You wake up in your comfortable bed, check your phone, maybe grab a coffee. Now imagine waking up to the sound of a cutlass being sharpened inches from your face while someone screams, "All hands on deck," in a voice that sounds like they've been gargling with rum and broken glass for 20 years. Welcome to your first day as a pirate, and congratulations, you're already about to die. See, here's the thing about pirate ships that Hollywood conveniently glosses over. They weren't floating theme parks filled with lovable rogues singing sea shanties. They were floating death traps crewed by the most desperate, violent, and psychologically damaged individuals of the 18th century. These weren't people who chose the pirate life because it looked fun. They were people who had literally no other options left. Your first mistake? Thinking you could just join a pirate crew. Pirates didn't exactly have a welcoming committee with fruit baskets and orientation packets. Most new crew members were either pressed into service, meaning kidnapped, or were survivors from ships that had just been brutally attacked. So either you're a victim or you're complicit in mass murder. Either way, you're starting your pirate career in the worst possible mental state. And that's before you even see the ship itself, a rotting wooden coffin held together by tar, prayer, and the sheer bloody-minded stubbornness of men who refuse to drown. Let's talk about your new crewmates, shall we? These aren't the romanticized pirates of your favorite movies. These are men who have been at sea for months, sometimes years, without proper medical care, decent food, or basic hygiene. They're covered in scars from previous battles. Many are missing limbs, eyes, or teeth. Some have open wounds that are festering because there's no proper medical treatment aboard. The quartermaster might be the closest thing to a doctor, and his idea of surgery involves a lot of rum and a very sharp knife. Your captain? He's not some charismatic leader with a heart of gold. He's a psychopath who maintains control through fear and violence. He's probably killed more of his own crew than enemy sailors, and he sees you as completely expendable. In fact, he's probably already planning how to use you as cannon fodder in the next raid. The only reason he hasn't killed you yet is because he needs someone to do the jobs that are too dangerous for his more experienced crew members. And speaking of those experienced crew members, they hate you. You're the new guy, which means you're weak, you're a liability, and you're competition for already scarce resources. They'll steal from you, they'll sabotage you, and if you show any sign of weakness, they'll throw you overboard without a second thought. There's no teamwork here, no camaraderie, just a bunch of desperate men who would sell their own mothers for a bottle of rum and a dry place to sleep. The ship's hierarchy is brutal and unforgiving. You start at the absolute bottom, which means you get the worst food, the worst sleeping spot, and the most dangerous jobs. Want to climb the rigging during a storm? That's your job, Mo. Want to go first into a battle where you'll probably die? Congratulations, you're the perfect candidate. Want to clean up after the crew gets food poisoning from eating rotten meat? Hope you have a strong stomach. But here's the really fun part. Even if you somehow manage to survive your first day, you're still trapped. Desertion is punishable by death, and even if you could somehow escape, where would you go? You're in the middle of the ocean, surrounded by water for hundreds of miles. The only land you'll see is when you're attacking coastal towns, and trust me, you don't want to be there when that happens. So there you are, standing on the deck of a ship that smells like death and desperation, surrounded by men who would kill you for a piece of stale bread, taking orders from a captain who sees you as nothing more than a tool to be calf, used and discarded. The sun is beating down mercilessly, the ship is rocking violently, and you're already feeling seasick. But wait, it gets worse. Let's talk about your immediate survival situation. You're probably wondering about basic necessities like water, right? Well, here's some good news and bad news. The good news is that there's water on the ship. The bad news is that it's stored in wooden barrels that have been sitting in the hot sun for weeks, turning green with algae and teeming with bacteria that would make a medieval plague doctor weep with horror. This water tastes like it was filtered through a corpse, and drinking it is basically playing Russian roulette with dysentery. But here's the catch: you have to drink it because dehydration will kill you faster than the inevitable food poisoning. So you're forced to choose between dying slowly from contaminated water or dying quickly from thirst. Welcome to pirate life. where all your options are terrible. And speaking of terrible options, let's discuss your first meal aboard this floating nightmare. Remember that comfortable breakfast you had this morning? Well, forget about it, because you're about to experience what happens when you take perfectly good food and let it rot in tropical heat for several months. The ship's cook, and I use that term very loosely, is probably a one-eyed maniac who thinks seasoning means adding more mold to whatever horrific concoction he's brewing in the galley. Your first meal will likely be hardtack, which is basically edible concrete that's been infested with weevils. These aren't just any weevils, they're pirate weevils, which means they're probably more violent and desperate than regular weevils. You'll be expected to eat around them, or better yet, just consider them extra protein. The veteran pirates will laugh at your disgust while they casually flick bugs out of their gruel like it's the most natural thing in the world. But here's where it gets really fun. You're not just dealing with the physical challenges. You're also dealing with the psychological warfare that comes with being the new guy on a ship full of psychopaths. Every conversation is a potential death sentence. Say the wrong thing, and you might find yourself being used as shark bait. Show weakness, and you'll be targeted for every horrible job on the ship. Try to be friendly, and they'll assume you're plotting against them. The social dynamics on a pirate ship are more complex and deadly than a Game of Thrones dinner party. There are alliances, betrayals, and power struggles happening constantly. As the new guy, you're automatically at the bottom of every possible hierarchy. You're not just fighting for survival against the elements, you're fighting for survival against your own crewmates, who see you as competition for limited resources. And let's not forget about the smell. Oh, the smell. Imagine the worst public restroom you've ever encountered. Multiply it by 1,000. Add the stench of rotting food, unwashed bodies, and various bodily fluids, then trap it all in a wooden box floating in the middle of Kate, the ocean with no ventilation. That's what you're breathing every single moment of every single day. Your nose will try to shut down in self-defense, but unfortunately, you still need to breathe to live. The noise is equally unbearable. These ships creak and groan constantly, like they're in physical pain, which they probably are, considering they're held together with hope and desperation. Add to that the constant shouting of orders, the sound of men retching over the side of the ship, and the occasional scream of someone falling from the rigging, and you've got a symphony of human misery that would make a funeral dirge. Sound cheerful. But let's talk about your immediate job prospects, because, surprise, you're not here for a pleasure cruise. Within minutes of boarding, you'll be assigned to one of the most dangerous and back-breaking jobs on the ship. Maybe you'll be sent up to the crow's nest during a storm that's the tiny platform at the top of the mast, where you'll be expected to spot enemy ships while being whipped around by hurricane-force winds. One wrong move, and you're plummeting to your death on the deck below, assuming you don't get blown into the ocean first. Or perhaps you'll be assigned to gun crew duty, which sounds exciting until you realize that 18th century cannons were basically controlled explosions waiting to happen. These weren't precision weapons. They were iron tubes packed with gunpowder that had about a 50-50 chance of exploding in your face instead of firing properly. And if they do fire correctly, the recoil can crush you against the ship's hull, breaking every bone in your body. The veterans have learned to jump out of the way at exactly the right moment, but you? You're cannon fodder in the most literal sense possible. Maybe you'll get lucky and be assigned to sail maintenance, which involves climbing up slippery ropes in all weather conditions to fix torn sails while the ship pitches and rolls beneath you. Your hands will be cut to ribbons by the rough rope, your arms will ache from holding on for dear life, and you'll be doing this while seasick, sleep-deprived, and probably suffering from scurvy. Oh, and if you fall? Well, the crew might throw you a rope if they're feeling generous, but they're more likely to just write you off as natural selection in action. The psychological toll of this lifestyle would break most modern people within hours. Every day you survive is just another day closer to an inevitable violent death, whether from disease, accident, battle, or execution. And this is just the beginning of your nightmare. We haven't even talked about the living conditions yet. So you survived your first few hours on deck, congratulations. Now it's time to see where you'll be living for the foreseeable future. And when I say living, I mean slowly dying in conditions that would make a medieval dungeon look like a luxury resort. Welcome to the gun deck, your new bedroom, dining room, and basically your entire world for the next however long you manage to survive. This is where the crew sleeps, eats, and exists in what can only be described as a horizontal coffin packed with the most desperate men in the Atlantic. The ceiling is so low that anyone over 5.5 feet tall has to walk around permanently hunched over like some kind of nautical Quasimodo. And you? You're going to be spending the majority of your time in this claustrophobic nightmare. Let's start with your sleeping arrangements, because oh boy, are you in for a treat. Forget about having your own bed that's a luxury reserved for officers who actually matter. You get a hammock, assuming you're lucky enough to find one that isn't already occupied by someone with more seniority than you. These hammocks are strung up so close together that you're literally sleeping inches away from sweaty, disease-ridden strangers who haven't bathed in months. But here's the really fun part: these hammocks aren't just close together horizontally, they're also stacked vertically, which means there's probably someone sleeping directly above you who might decide to relieve themselves in the middle of the night. And guess where that's going to end up? That's right all over you. Hope you weren't planning on staying clean, because personal hygiene is about to become a distant memory. The smell in the gun deck is beyond description. Imagine taking every horrible odor you've ever encountered: rotting garbage, sewage, vomit, body odor, infected wounds, and death, then concentrating it into a space the size of a small warehouse and trapping it there for months. The air is so thick with stench that you can practically taste it. And trust me, you don't want to taste it. Veterans have learned to breathe through their mouths, but that just means they're tasting the horror instead of smelling it. And speaking of air, there isn't much of it. Ventilation on these ships is basically non-existent. There might be a few small hatches that can be opened during good weather, but most of the time you're breathing recycled air that's been through the lungs of dozens of sick, malnourished men. The oxygen levels are so low that you'll find yourself constantly short of breath, dizzy, and struggling to think clearly. It's like being slowly suffocated while trying to sleep. But wait, it gets worse. Let's talk about the ship's bathroom facilities, or, as they're euphemistically called, the head. This is basically a plank with a hole in it that hangs over the side of the ship. No privacy, no toilet paper, no dignity. You're doing your business while hanging over the ocean, praying that a wave doesn't wash you overboard while you're in the most vulnerable position imaginable. And here's the best part: sometimes the wind blows in the wrong direction, which means, well, let's just say you'll be getting more familiar with your fellow crew members' bodily functions than you ever wanted to. The lack of privacy extends to every aspect of your existence. There's literally nowhere on the ship where you can be alone. Every conversation can be overheard, every action is watched, and every moment of weakness is noted by men who are looking for any excuse to eliminate competition. You're living in a panopticon of desperation where paranoia isn't just healthy, it's essential for survival. Disease spreads through the crew like wildfire in these conditions. Dysentery, typhus, scurvy, and various tropical fevers are constant companions. You'll watch men waste away from illnesses that would be easily treatable today, but on a pirate ship, medical care consists of amputation, alcohol, and prayer, usually in that order. The doctor is probably someone who once saw a real physician from a distance, and his medical bag contains a rusty saw, a bottle of rum, and a leather strap for you to bite down on while he operates. And let's not forget about the rats. Oh, the rats. These aren't cute pet store rats, these are ship rats, which are basically the Navy SEAL of the rodent world. They're aggressive, disease-carrying, and they've learned to see humans as just another source of food. They'll steal your rations, chew on your belongings, and if you're unlucky enough to fall asleep with an open wound, they might decide to help themselves to a midnight snack. The crew has long since given up trying to eliminate them. They're just another part of the ecosystem now. The temperature below deck is absolutely brutal. During the day, the sun beats down on the wooden hull, turning the gun deck into a sauna where temperatures can reach well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. At night, especially in northern waters, it can drop so low that you'll shiver uncontrollably in your thin, lice-infested clothing. There's no insulation, no heating, no cooling, just the raw, unfiltered fury of whatever weather nature decides to throw at you. The psychological isolation is crushing. You're surrounded by people but completely alone, trapped in a wooden box with dozens of potential killers, slowly going insane from the smell, the noise, the fear, and the complete absence of anything resembling human comfort or dignity. And then there's the food storage situation, which somehow manages to be even worse than the living conditions. The ship's provisions are stored in the same area where you sleep, which means you're literally sleeping next to barrels of rotting meat and moldy grain that attract every conceivable pest. The smell of decomposing food mixes with the smell of unwashed bodies to create an olfactory nightmare that would make a garbage dump seem fragrant by comparison. But here's where it gets really nightmarish, the water situation. Remember that green algae-filled water I mentioned earlier? Well, it's stored in wooden barrels that have been sitting in the dark, humid gun deck for weeks or months. These barrels leak, which means the deck is constantly wet with a mixture of contaminated water, bodily fluids, and whatever else has been spilled or excreted. You're walking around in a toxic soup that seeps into your shoes, your clothes, and eventually your skin. The constant moisture creates the perfect breeding ground for every kind of fungus and bacteria imaginable. Your clothes will start to rot while you're wearing them, and your skin will develop rashes and infections that never heal.
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
You're wearing them, and your skin will develop rashes and infections that never heal because there's no way to stay clean or dry. The fabric literally disintegrates from the combination of salt water, sweat, and various bodily fluids, leaving you wearing what amounts to moldy rags that provide no protection from the elements. Let's talk about personal possessions, because you can forget about having any. Everything you own will be stolen, destroyed, or eaten by rats within days. That nice jacket you're wearing? It's going to be claimed by someone with more seniority. Those shoes? They'll be traded for a swig of rum before the week is out. Any jewelry or valuables? They'll disappear faster than your dignity, and if you complain, you'll probably get a knife in the ribs for your trouble. The noise level below deck is absolutely maddening. During storms, the ship creaks and groans so loudly that you can't hear yourself think. The sound of water sloshing around in the bilge, the constant dripping from various leaks, and the scratching of rats in the walls creates a symphony of misery that never stops. Add to that the snoring, coughing, moaning, and occasional screaming from your fellow crew members, and you've got a 24-hour audio nightmare that would drive a monk to violence. Sleep becomes virtually impossible, not just because of the noise and smell, but because of the constant motion of the ship. Even in calm seas, the ship is always moving, always rocking, always throwing you around in your hammock like a rag doll. During storms, you'll be thrown so violently that you'll wonder if the ship is trying to kill you personally. Many crew members are so exhausted from lack of sleep that they start hallucinating, which only adds to the general atmosphere of madness and paranoia. And here's something they don't tell you about life at sea: the complete absence of fresh water for washing. You might think you could use seawater, but salt water actually makes you dirtier and can cause painful skin conditions. So you're stuck with whatever tiny amount of fresh water you can spare from your drinking ration, which means you're essentially never clean. Ever. The layer of grime, salt, and various bodily fluids that builds up on your skin becomes like a second skin that you can't remove. The psychological warfare extends even to basic bodily functions. The stronger crew members will claim the best spots near the limited ventilation, leaving newcomers to suffocate in the stuffiest, most horrible corners of the gun deck. They'll wake you up at all hours just to assert dominance, steal your food while you're sleeping, and make sure you never get a moment's peace or comfort. But perhaps the most horrifying aspect of living in these conditions is the gradual realization that this isn't temporary. This isn't a brief hardship that you'll overcome. This is your new reality for as long as you manage to survive. Every day that passes makes you more like the broken, desperate men around you, and you can feel your sanity slipping away one sleepless night at a time. Congratulations. You've somehow survived your first night in the floating torture chamber that is a pirate ship's gun deck. Now it's time to discover what you'll be doing for work. And spoiler alert, it's going to make your worst job look like a paid vacation at a luxury resort. The sun isn't even up yet, but you're being kicked awake by the bosun's mate, a charming gentleman who communicates primarily through violence and creative profanity. "All hands on deck," he screams, "and you better move fast because the last person up gets volunteered for the most dangerous job of the day." And trust me, on a pirate ship, even the safe jobs can kill you in creative and horrible ways. Your first task of the day? Swabbing the deck. Now, this might sound simple and peaceful, like a nice bit of light cleaning to start your morning, but you're not using a modern mop with clean water. You're using a filthy rag attached to a stick, and the water you're using has been sitting in buckets for days, growing things that marine biologists haven't even discovered yet. The deck itself is covered in a mixture of salt spray, blood from yesterday's disciplinary actions, vomit from crew members who couldn't make it to the rail, and various other bodily fluids that I won't describe in detail because you might be eating while reading this. But here's the fun part: you're doing this while the ship is pitching and rolling in the waves. Every time the ship lurches, you're sliding across the deck like a human hockey puck, slamming into cannons, barrels, and other crew members who are also trying not to die while doing their morning chores. The deck is slippery with seawater and whatever else has been spilled, so you're constantly on the verge of falling and cracking your skull open on the nearest hard surface. And that's just the warm-up. Once you've finished making the deck marginally less disgusting, it's time for the real work to begin. Today's assignment? Climbing the rigging to adjust the sails. For those of you who aren't familiar with 18th century nautical terminology, rigging refers to the complex network of ropes, pulleys, and death traps that hold the sails in place. It's basically a three-dimensional maze of rope suspended 100 feet above a deck that's covered in cannons and other things you really don't want to land on. The rigging itself is made of hemp rope that's been soaked in salt water, tar, and the tears of previous crew members who didn't make it down alive. This rope is rough enough to strip the skin from your hands, and it's always wet, which makes it incredibly slippery. You'll be expected to climb this nautical obstacle course while carrying heavy sailcloth, tools, and whatever else needs to be hauled up to the yard arms, all while the ship is moving beneath you like a bucking bronco with Saul. Anger management issues. The wind is your enemy up there. What feels like a gentle breeze on deck becomes a hurricane-force gale when you're hanging from a rope 100 feet in the air. The higher you climb, the more the ship's movement is amplified. So you're not just dealing with the pitch and roll of the waves, you're dealing with a violent swinging motion that can easily fling you off into the ocean, or slam you into the mast hard enough to break every bone in your body. And here's the really terrifying part: you're expected to do this work quickly. The officers don't care if you're afraid of heights, if you're seasick, or if you're having a panic attack. They need the sails adjusted now, and if you're too slow, you'll be encouraged with a cat and tails, which is basically a whip designed to remove strips of flesh from your back. The scars from these beatings never heal properly in the salt air, so you'll be carrying permanent reminders of every time you weren't fast enough to satisfy your psychotic supervisors. But let's say you somehow managed to survive your first trip up the rigging without falling to your death. Congratulations. Now it's time to learn about sail maintenance, which is about as fun as it sounds. Sails are made of heavy canvas that's been treated with tar to make it waterproof, and they're constantly being damaged by wind, salt, and the general violence of ocean life. Your job is to repair these tears using a sail needle, which is basically a medieval torture device disguised as a sewing tool. These needles are thick enough to punch through the heavy canvas, which means they're also thick enough to punch through your fingers, hands, and any other body parts that get in the way. The thread you're using is made of hemp that's been tarred, so it's sticky, difficult to work with, and it leaves your hands black with tar that never washes off. You'll be sitting on the deck, hunched over a sail that weighs more than you do, trying to make neat stitches while the ship tosses you around like a rag doll. And here's where the real nightmare begins. You're not just fixing sails. You're also responsible for maintaining the ship's rigging, which means splicing rope, tarring the lines, and replacing worn-out sections. Rope splicing is an art form that takes years to master, but you'll be expected to produce perfect results immediately. A poorly spliced rope can snap under load, which means someone could die. And guess who's going to be blamed for that? That's right, the new guy who doesn't know what he's doing. The work never stops. When you're not climbing the rigging or fixing sails, you're scraping barnacles off the ship's hull, which involves hanging over the side of the ship on a rope while scraping at razor-sharp sea creatures with a knife. The barnacles cut your hands to ribbons, the salt water burns in your wounds, and you're constantly in danger of being swept away by a wave or eaten by whatever predators are following the ship looking for an easy meal. But wait, there's more. You'll also be assigned to gun crew duty, which means learning to operate cannons that are basically controlled explosions waiting to happen. These weapons are loaded with gunpowder that's being stored in damp conditions for months, making it unpredictable and dangerous. The cannons themselves are massive iron monsters that can crush you if you're not careful, and the recoil from firing them can break bones or knock you unconscious. The physical toll of this work is absolutely devastating. Within days, your hands will be cut, blistered, and permanently stained with tar. Your back will ache from the constant bending and lifting. Your shoulders will be raw from carrying heavy loads, and your feet will be cut up from walking on rough deck surfaces while barefoot. Every muscle in your body will be screaming in agony, and you'll be doing this work while sleep-deprived, malnourished, and probably suffering from some kind of tropical disease. And here's the truly horrifying part. This is just the routine daily work. We haven't even talked about what happens during storms, battles, or when something goes seriously wrong with the ship. This is your new normal, and it's going to continue every single day until you die, which, statistically speaking, is going to happen much sooner than you think. But let's talk about the psychological aspect of this back-breaking labor, because the mental toll might actually be worse than the physical destruction of your body. You're not just doing dangerous work, you're doing it while being constantly screamed at, threatened, and humiliated by men who see you as less than human. Every mistake you make is met with violence, every sign of weakness is exploited, and every moment of rest is seen as laziness that needs to be corrected with a whip. The officers treat you like a disposable tool, and the veteran crew members see you as competition for already scarce resources. Nobody cares if you're injured, exhausted, or on the verge of collapse. If you can't keep up, you'll be replaced by the next desperate soul they pick up, and your body will be thrown overboard without ceremony. There's no workers' compensation, no sick leave, no retirement plan, just brutal labor until you die. And here's what really breaks people: the complete absence of hope. In a normal job, no matter how terrible, you can at least look forward to going home at the end of the day, or quitting and finding something better. But on a pirate ship, there is no end of the day. There is no home to go to. And there is no quitting. You're trapped in this nightmare until death releases you, and every single day that passes just brings you closer to that inevitable end. So you've somehow managed to survive a few days of backbreaking labor without dying, which honestly puts you ahead of most newcomers. But here's the thing about pirate ships: just when you think you've hit rock bottom, someone hands you a shovel and tells you to keep digging. Today's your lucky day, because you're about to discover what happens when you inevitably get injured. And spoiler alert, the medical care makes medieval barber surgeons look like Nobel Prize winners. Let's say you've cut your hand while splicing rope, a minor injury that would require a few stitches and a bandage in the modern world. But on a pirate ship, that small cut is basically a death sentence with a delayed execution date. The ship's surgeon is probably a guy named Sawbones MC Gillicuddy, who learned everything he knows about medicine from watching other people die badly. His medical bag consists of a rusty saw, a bottle of rum, a leather strap for you to bite down on, and a prayer book for when things go inevitably wrong. First, he'll examine your wound with hands that haven't been washed since the last time it rained, while standing in a surgery. That's basically a corner of the gun deck lit by a single flickering candle. The operating table is a piece of wood that's been used for everything from food preparation to carpentry, and it's covered in stains that you really don't want to think about. The air is thick with the smell of infection, gangrene, and the lingering aroma of previous patients who didn't make it through their treatment. Sawbones will take one look at your cut and immediately decide that amputation is the only option. This is his solution to everything headache. Amputation. Splinter? Amputation. Mild seasickness? Well, maybe just a good bleeding, but amputation is definitely on the table. He'll heat up his saw in the galley fire, which is the closest thing to sterilization available, and then go to work while you're held down by crew members who are placing bets on whether you'll survive the next 5 minutes. The anesthesia consists of a bottle of rum that's been watered down so much, it's basically alcoholic disappointment. You'll be expected to drink as much as you can hold down while Sawbones sharpens his tools and reminisces about all the previous patients he's helped transition to the afterlife. The rum will make you dizzy and nauseous, but it won't do much to dull the pain of having a limb removed with a tool that's better suited for cutting firewood. But let's say you're one of the lucky ones, and Sawbones decides your hand can be saved. He'll clean the wound with seawater, which is basically injecting bacteria directly into your bloodstream, then stitch it up with thread that's been sitting in his medical bag for months, accumulating every possible form of treaty, contamination. The needle he uses has been sterilized in the same fire where they cook the crew's meals, so it's probably carrying traces of rotten meat and whatever else is being thrown into the galley flames. The bandage will be a piece of cloth that's been torn from someone's old shirt, and it will be changed exactly never. You'll be expected to return to work immediately, because disability leave isn't a concept that exists in the pirate world. That infected hand will be expected to climb rigging, splice rope, and handle cannons just like it did before, except now it's swollen, oozing, and sending shooting pains up your arm every time you move it. Within days, the infection will spread, turning your hand into a grotesque balloon of pus and rotting flesh. The smell will be so bad that even your fellow crew members who haven't bathed in months will avoid you. The pain will be so intense that you'll be begging for death, and the fever will make you hallucinate conversations with relatives who are thankfully thousands of miles away from this floating nightmare. But here's where it gets really fun. Just when you think you can't possibly get any sicker, it's time for your first pirate raid. The lookout has spotted a merchant vessel, and suddenly every crew member is transformed from a lazy, disease-ridden vagrant into a bloodthirsty killing machine. The captain is screaming orders, the crew is loading weapons, and you're about to discover that all the suffering you've endured so far was just preparation for the main event. You'll be handed a cutlass that's been used by dozens of previous owners, many of whom died violently while holding it. The blade is nicked and dull, the handle is sticky with old blood, and it's heavier than you expected. You've never used a sword before, but that's fine because you're not expected to live long enough to get good at it. Your job is to look scary and absorb enemy fire while the experienced pirates do the actual fighting. The approach to the target ship is terrifying beyond description. The crew is whooping and screaming like demons, firing guns into the air, and working themselves into a frenzy of violence that would make a medieval berserker proud. The smell of gunpowder mixes with the stench of unwashed bodies and the metallic scent of weapons being sharpened. You're surrounded by men who are genuinely excited about the prospect of killing strangers for money, and you're expected to share their enthusiasm. When the ships finally close together, you'll be expected to swing across on a rope like some kind of nautical Tarzan, except you're doing it while people are shooting at you with muskets and cannons. The rope is wet, your hands are infected and weak, and you're about to attempt an acrobatic maneuver that would challenge a professional circus performer. The chances of you making it across without falling into the ocean or getting shot are approximately the same as winning the lottery while being struck by lightning. But let's say you somehow make it onto the enemy ship alive. Now you're in the middle of a chaotic battle with no training, no experience, and weapons that are trying to kill you almost as much as the enemy is. Men are screaming, blood is flying everywhere, and you're expected to fight for your life against professional sailors who are defending their ship and their cargo. These aren't helpless victims, they're experienced seamen who know how to fight, and they're not going to go down without taking a few pirates with them. The violence is brutal and personal. This isn't like movie sword fights with elaborate choreography and dramatic dialogue. This is desperate, ugly, close-quarters combat where people are trying to kill each other with whatever weapons they can find. You'll see men die in ways that will haunt your nightmares for the rest of your probably very short life. The deck will be slippery with blood, the air will be thick with smoke and screams, and you'll be fighting for your life while your infected hand throbs with every heartbeat. And here's the really terrifying part: even if you survive the battle, you're now a murderer. You've crossed a line that can never be uncrossed, and you're now officially a pirate in the eyes of every government in the world. If you're ever captured, you'll be hanged without trial, and your family back home will be ashamed to speak your name. There's no going back to your old life now you're committed to this path of violence and desperation until death finally claims you. But the psychological trauma doesn't end when the battle does. You'll be expected to help loot the captured ship, which means going through the personal belongings of people you may have just killed. You'll find letters from their families, photographs of their children, and personal mementos that remind you that these weren't just faceless enemies. They were human beings with lives and loved ones. The guilt will eat at you like acid, but you'll be expected to celebrate your victory with rum and stories about how brave you were. The aftermath of battle is almost worse than the fighting itself. The wounded from both sides are screaming in agony, the deck is covered in blood and body parts, and you're expected to help dispose of the dead by throwing them overboard like garbage. Your watchmen you've been living with for weeks die slowly from their wounds, begging for help that doesn't exist. The smell of death mixes with the salt air to create a stench that will follow you for the rest of your life. And if you think the violence ends with the battle, you're tragically mistaken. Pirates don't just steal cargo, they often take prisoners who can be sold as slaves or held for ransom. You'll be expected to guard these terrified captives, many of whom are women and children who are begging for mercy you're not allowed to give. The moral corruption of your new life extends far beyond simple theft and murder. You're now part of a system that treats human beings as commodities to be bought and sold. But here's what really breaks people: the realization that you're not just a victim of this system anymore. You're an active participant in creating more victims. Every successful raid means more innocent people will suffer, more families will be destroyed, and more lives will be ended in violence. You can tell yourself that you're just trying to survive, but deep down you know that you've become exactly the kind of monster that parents warn their children about in bedtime stories. The guilt and trauma of this lifestyle create a psychological downward spiral that's impossible to escape. Many pirates turn to alcohol and violence to cope with what they've become, which only makes them more dangerous and unpredictable. The crew becomes increasingly paranoid and unstable, with men turning on each other over imagined slights and perceived betrayals. You're not just fighting external enemies anymore, you're fighting a constant battle against your own crewmates who might decide you're a threat to their survival. So you've somehow managed to survive the medical nightmare, the brutal labor, and even your first pirate raid without dying. Congratulations! You're now officially tougher than 90% of the people who've ever stepped foot on a pirate ship. But here's the thing about the ocean. It doesn't care about your newfound resilience, your battle scars, or your growing collection of psychological trauma. Mother Nature is about to remind you that humans are just tiny, insignificant specks on a planet that's mostly covered in water that wants to kill you. Welcome to your first major storm at sea, where you'll discover that everything you've experienced so far was just the appetizer. And the main course is a hurricane that's going to try to murder you in ways that would make your previous suffering look like a relaxing spa day. It starts with the barometer dropping and the wind picking up, which sounds innocent enough until you realize that on a sailing ship, wind isn't just whether it's a force of nature that can literally tear your world apart. The experienced crew members start getting that look in their eyes, the same look that prey animals get when they smell a predator nearby. They know what's coming, and they know that some of them aren't going to live through it. The first sign of real trouble is when the captain orders all hands to secure the ship for heavy weather. This sounds like a reasonable precaution until you realize that securing the ship means lashing down everything that isn't nailed down and then checking to make sure the things that are nailed down are actually going to stay that way when the ocean starts trying to flip your ship upside down and shake it like a maraca. You'll be sent below to secure the cannons, which are essentially multi-ton iron monsters that will crush you like a bug if they break loose during the storm. These cannons are held in place by ropes and wooden blocks, and your job is to make sure they're tied down tight enough to withstand forces that can snap trees in half. The problem is, you're trying to do this while the ship is already starting to pitch and roll, which means you're wrestling with equipment that weighs more than a small car while standing on a surface that's constantly moving beneath your taff. Feet. The wind builds gradually at first, then suddenly explodes into a howling monster that sounds like all the demons of hell have been let loose at once. The rigging starts screaming, and I mean literally screaming as the wind tears through it at speeds that would make a jet engine jealous. The sound is so loud that you can't hear yourself think, and the ship starts moving in ways that defy every law of physics you thought you understood. But here's where it gets really terrifying. You're not just dealing with wind. You're dealing with waves that are the size of mountains, and they're coming at your ship from every direction at once. These aren't the gentle swells you see in movies. These are walls of water that are literally trying to crush your ship like an empty beer can. When a wave hits, the entire ship disappears underwater for several seconds, and you're left wondering if you're going to surface again or if you're about to become fish food. The motion of the ship during a storm is absolutely indescribable. Imagine being inside a washing machine that's being operated by a psychotic giant who's trying to see how many times he can flip it end over end before it breaks. You're thrown around like a rag doll, slamming into bulkheads, cannons, and other crew members who are also being tossed around like human pinballs. Every impact feels like being hit by a truck, and you're getting hit dozens of times per minute. And you're expected to work during this chaos. The sails need to be adjusted constantly to keep the ship from being torn apart, which means climbing the rigging in conditions that would challenge a professional acrobat. The ropes are slippery with rain and spray, the wind is trying to tear you loose and fling you into the ocean, and you're doing all of this while the ship is performing aerial maneuvers that would make a stunt pilot sick to his stomach. But the real horror isn't the physical danger, it's the psychological terror of realizing that you're completely helpless against forces that are so much bigger than you that you might as well be fighting the concept of gravity itself. The storm doesn't care about your plans, your hopes, your fears, or your desperate desire to survive. It's a mindless force of nature that's trying to kill you for no other reason than because you happen to be in its path. The noise is beyond description. The wind is screaming, the rigging is shrieking, the ship is groaning and cracking like it's being tortured, and the waves are crashing over the deck with the sound of artillery fire. You can't communicate with anyone except through gestures and screaming, and half the time you can't even hear yourself scream. The sensory overload is so intense that your brain starts to shut down, and you find yourself moving through the storm like a zombie, responding to orders through pure muscle memory because conscious thought has become impossible. The cold is absolutely brutal. The rain and spray soak through your clothes in seconds, and the wind strips away your body heat so fast that hypothermia becomes a real danger even in tropical waters. Your hands become so numb that you can't feel the ropes you're supposed to be gripping, which makes every task 10 times more dangerous. You're shivering so violently that you can't perform fine motor skills, but you're still expected to tie complex knots and handle delicate equipment. And then there's the fear. Not just fear of dying that's almost become routine by now. This is existential terror, the kind of fear that comes for realizing that you're nothing more than a tiny speck of flesh and bone being thrown around by forces that are so vast and powerful that they make your entire existence seem meaningless. You're face to face with the raw, unfiltered hostility of nature itself, and it's trying to kill you with the casual indifference of someone swatting a fly. The storm can last for days, and during that time, you'll be expected to work constantly with no sleep, no hot food, and no break from the terror. Men will be swept overboard and disappear into the darkness, their screams lost in the howling wind. Others will be crushed by equipment or killed by falling debris. The ship will be damaged in ways that threaten its very survival, and you'll be expected to help with repairs while the storm is still raging. But here's what really breaks people, the realization that this is just one storm among many. If you survive this one, there will be others, and each one will be a roll of the dice to see if today is the day you die. The ocean is vast and unpredictable, and storms are just one of the many ways it can kill you. There are also diseases, accidents, battles, and the constant possibility that your own crewmates will decide you're more trouble than you're worth. The statistics are absolutely terrifying. The average lifespan of a pirate was measured in months, not years. Most died within their first year, and those who survived longer were usually so physically and psychologically damaged that they were barely recognizable as human beings. The ones who managed to retire from piracy, and there weren't many, were broken men who spent their remaining years drinking away memories that would never stop haunting them. And this is your reality now. Every morning you wake up, if you're lucky enough to wake up, you're one step closer to a violent death in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by men who see you as expendable. There's no pension plan, no medical insurance, no hope of a peaceful retirement. There's just the certainty that you'll die badly, probably soon, and probably in a way that would make your worst nightmares seem pleasant by comparison. So the next time you're having a bad day at work, remember the pirates, and be grateful that your biggest worry is probably a difficult boss or a boring meeting. Because trust me, you wouldn't last a day on a pirate ship, and that's probably the best thing that could happen to you. But let's say you somehow managed to survive your first storm without being crushed, drowned, or driven completely insane. Congratulations, you've just earned yourself the privilege of experiencing the daily reality of pirate life, which is somehow even worse than the natural disasters, because at least hurricanes aren't personally trying to torture you for entertainment. Welcome to a world where violence isn't just common, it's the primary form of communication, conflict resolution, and recreational activity, all rolled into one bloody package. These aren't the romanticized pirates from movies who sword fight with elegant choreography and witty banter. These are desperate, brutal men who've been stripped of everything that makes them human, and they're going to take out their frustrations on anyone weaker than them. Which, as the new guy, is definitely you. The hierarchy on a pirate ship is maintained through pure, unadulterated brutality. The captain stays in power by being the most ruthless killer on board, and he maintains discipline through public displays of violence that would make medieval executioners proud. Disobey an order, question authority, or even look at someone the wrong way, and you'll find yourself on the receiving end of punishments that were designed specifically to cause maximum pain while keeping you alive enough to serve as an example to others. Flogging is considered a light punishment, which should tell you everything you need to know about pirate justice. The cat-o'-nine-tails isn't just a whip, it's a carefully designed instrument of torture with multiple lever strips that are often embedded with metal or glass to maximize the damage. A dozen lashes will leave your back looking like hamburger, and you'll be expected to return to work immediately afterward because pirates don't believe in sick days or workers' compensation. But flogging is nothing compared to keel hauling, which is essentially a death sentence disguised as punishment. They tie you to a rope, throw you overboard, and drag you under the ship from one side to the other. The barnacles and sharp edges on the hull will shred your skin to ribbons, assuming you don't drown first from being underwater for several minutes. Most men don't survive keel hauling, and those who do are usually so mutilated that they die from infection within days. Then there's marooning, which sounds almost pleasant until you realize it means being abandoned on a deserted island with no food, no water, and no hope of rescue. Pirates would leave you with a pistol containing a single bullet, not for hunting or signaling for help, but so you could end your own suffering when the thirst and hunger became unbearable. Most marooned pirates died within a week, and the ones who lasted longer usually went insane from isolation and desperation. And these punishments weren't reserved for serious crimes. You could be flogged for not working fast enough, keel-hauled for talking back to an officer, or marooned for accidentally breaking something valuable. The justice system on a pirate ship was based on the mood of whoever was in charge at the moment, and their mood was usually somewhere between homicidally angry and psychotically violent. But even worse than the official punishments was the constant threat of violence from your fellow crew members. These men had been brutalized by life to the point where they'd lost all empathy or human compassion. They'd torture you for fun, steal your food while you're starving, and sell you out to enemies without a second thought. Trust was a luxury that no one could afford, and friendship was a weakness that could get you killed. The sleeping arrangements were designed to maximize misery and conflict. You'd be crammed into a space barely large enough for half the crew, sleeping on hard wooden planks with no padding or privacy. Men would fight over sleeping spots, steal each other's possessions, and settle disputes with knives in the dark. You'd go to sleep every night wondering if you'd wake up with your throat cut, and you'd wake up every morning surprised that you were still alive. Personal hygiene was non-existent, which meant you'd be living in close quarters with men who hadn't bathed in months and who considered lice and fleas to be acceptable roommates. The smell was so intense that it could literally make you sick, and you'd quickly discover that fresh air was a luxury you'd taken for granted. The stench of unwashed bodies, rotting food, and human waste would permeate everything you owned, and you'd never be able to escape it. Food fights weren't playful affairs, they were violent battles over scraps of rotten meat and moldy bread. Men would literally kill each other over a piece of salt pork that was more maggot than meat, and you'd be expected to fight for your share or go hungry. The stronger crew members would take the best food for themselves, leaving you with whatever scraps they didn't want, which usually meant the parts that were too rotten even for pirates to stomach. Medical care was a joke with a punchline that usually involved amputation. The ship's surgeon was typically a drunk who'd learned his trade through trial and error, mostly error. If you were injured, your treatment options were limited to alcohol as an anesthetic, a saw for removing damaged limbs, and prayer for everything else. Most medical procedures were performed without any real knowledge of anatomy or hygiene, which meant that even minor injuries often became infected and fatal. But here's the really terrifying part. This wasn't considered unusual or excessive. This was just normal life aboard a pirate ship, the baseline level of brutality that everyone accepted as routine. The men who survived in this environment weren't just tough, they were completely dehumanized monsters who'd learned to enjoy inflicting pain on others because it was the only way to feel powerful in a world that treated them as disposable. The psychological warfare was constant and deliberate. Senior crew members would target new arrivals with systematic harassment designed to break their spirit and establish dominance. They'd steal your possessions, sabotage your work, and spread rumors about you to turn other crew members against you. This wasn't just bullying, it was a carefully orchestrated campaign to destroy your mental health and make you completely dependent on their mercy for survival. And let's talk about the gambling, because pirates loved their games of chance almost as much as they loved violence. Men would bet everything they owned on card games, dice, or fights between crew members. The problem was that pirates didn't just gamble with money, they'd bet their food rations, their share of future plunder, their weapons, and even their lives. Losing a bet could mean going hungry for weeks, being forced to work without pay, or having to fight a duel to the death over a debt you couldn't pay. The gambling debts created a secondary economy of violence and exploitation. Men who lost big would be forced to become essentially slaves to their creditors, working extra shifts and handing over their earnings until the debt was paid. Some debts were designed to be unpayable, creating a permanent underclass of crew members who were treated even worse than the regular pirates. These debt slaves were often used as human shields during battles or forced to take on the most dangerous jobs with no additional compensation. The initiation rituals for new crew members were designed to be as humiliating and painful as possible. You'd be forced to endure mock trials where you were accused of imaginary crimes, then subjected to punishments that were real enough to cause permanent damage. Some ships had traditions of branding new members with hot irons, cutting off fingers or toes as insurance against desertion, or forcing them to eat disgusting combinations of rotten food and human waste. But perhaps the most psychologically devastating aspect was the constant reminder that you were completely expendable. Pirates would regularly sell crew members into slavery, abandon injured men on random islands, or simply throw troublemakers overboard in the middle of the night. Your life had no value beyond your immediate usefulness, and the moment you became more trouble than you were worth, you'd disappear without a trace. The paranoia was suffocating. You couldn't trust anyone, because today's ally could be tomorrow's executioner. Men would form temporary alliances based on mutual benefit, but these partnerships could dissolve into deadly violence at any moment. You'd learn to sleep with one eye open, eat your food quickly before someone could poison it, and never turn your back on anyone, even during casual conversations. This constant state of fear and hypervigilance would destroy your mental health within weeks. You'd develop anxiety disorders, depression, and probably some form of PTSD that wouldn't have a name for another few centuries. The stress would manifest in physical symptoms, hair loss, weight loss, chronic insomnia, and digestive problems that would make your already miserable existence even more unbearable. And remember, this was just the baseline experience of being aboard a pirate ship when nothing particularly dramatic was happening. This was the good times, the peaceful periods between storms, battles, and disasters. When actual emergencies occurred, the level of brutality and desperation would increase exponentially, turning an already hellish existence into something that defied description. So you somehow managed to survive the storms, endure the daily beatings, and navigate the psychological minefield of pirate politics without getting yourself killed. Congratulations, you're now about to discover that the ocean has saved the worst for last. Welcome to the wonderful world of maritime disease, where your own body is going to betray you in ways that would make the Spanish Inquisition look like a wellness retreat. Let's start with scurvy, because it's the most famous way that ships killed their crews, and it's going to teach you that vitamin deficiency isn't just about feeling a little tired. Scurvy is your body slowly falling apart at the molecular level. And it's going to happen to you whether you like it or not, because fresh fruits and vegetables are luxuries that pirates can't afford and wouldn't know how to preserve even if they could. It starts innocently enough. You'll feel tired and weak, which you'll probably attribute to the back-breaking labor and constant stress of pirate life. But then your gums will start bleeding, and not just a little bit. We're talking about blood pouring out of your mouth every time you try to eat, drink, or even talk. Your teeth will start falling out one by one, not because of poor dental hygiene though, that's definitely a factor, but because your body is literally forgetting how to hold itself together. But that's just the beginning of your scurvy nightmare. Your old wounds will start reopening, because your body can no longer produce the collagen needed to keep scar tissue intact. That cut you got 3 months ago? It's going to split open again, and this time it won't heal. Every injury you've ever had will come back to haunt you, turning your body into a roadmap of past trauma that refuses to stay in the past. The bruising is absolutely horrific. Your skin will develop massive purple and black marks from impacts that shouldn't even leave a mark. Touch something too hard and you'll have a bruise the size of a dinner plate. These aren't normal bruises, they're internal bleeding under skin that's become so fragile it might as well be made of tissue paper. You'll look like you've been beaten with a club, even when nobody's laid a hand on you. And then there's the psychological component of scurvy that nobody talks about. The disease affects your brain, causing depression, anxiety, and mood swings that make you even more dangerous to be around. You'll become paranoid, aggressive, and unpredictable, which is exactly what you don't want to be when you're surrounded by violent men who are looking for any excuse to hurt someone. Your own disease will turn you into a target for violence, creating a vicious cycle where your illness makes you more likely to be attacked, and the attacks make your illness worse. But scurvy is just one item on the menu of diseases that are waiting to kill you. Let's talk about dysentery, which is basically your digestive system declaring war on the rest of your body. The contaminated food and water on pirate ships guarantee that you'll be exposed to bacteria that will turn your intestines into a battlefield. You'll experience diarrhea so severe that you'll become dehydrated within hours, and there's no clean water available to replace what you're losing. The cramping is absolutely excruciating. Imagine someone twisting your intestines into knots while simultaneously setting them on fire. You'll be doubled over in pain, but you'll still be expected to work because pirates don't believe in sick days. You'll be climbing rigging and hauling rope while your body is literally evacuating itself from both ends, and the dehydration will make you so weak that you'll be in constant danger of falling to your death. Typhus is another delightful passenger on every pirate ship, spread by the lice and fleas that consider your unwashed body to be prime real estate. The fever will spike so high that you'll hallucinate, seeing things that aren't there and having conversations with people who died months ago. Your body temperature will rise to levels that literally cook your brain, causing permanent damage even if you somehow survive the disease. The headaches are beyond description. Imagine someone driving railroad spikes through your skull while simultaneously squeezing your head in a vice. You'll be photophobic, meaning that even dim light will cause unbearable pain, but you'll still be expected to work in the blazing sun because pirates don't accommodate medical conditions. The delirium will make you dangerous to yourself and others, and your crewmates will be torn between wanting to help you and wanting to throw you overboard before you spread the disease to them. Malaria is waiting for you in every tropical port, carried by mosquitoes that see sailors as an all-you-can-eat buffet. The fever cycles are absolutely brutal. You'll alternate between burning up and freezing, sometimes within the same hour. Your body will shake so violently that you won't be able to perform even simple tasks, and the chills will be so severe that you'll feel like you're freezing to death even in tropical heat. The yellow fever is even worse. turning your skin the color of a banana while your liver slowly dissolves. You'll vomit blood, lots of it, and your body will shut down organ by organ in a process that's both agonizing and inevitable. The mortality rate is around 50%, which means that every time someone on your ship gets yellow fever, you're essentially flipping a coin to see if they live or die. And here's the really terrifying part: the ship's medical officer is probably drunker than you are and has about as much medical training as a randomly selected farm animal. His treatment options are limited to bleeding you with dirty knives, giving you mercury-based medicines that are more poisonous than the diseases they're supposed to treat, and amputating limbs with rusty saws and no anesthesia beyond a bottle of rum. The surgical procedures are exercises in torture disguised as medical care. Need a tooth pulled? The ship's surgeon will grab it with pliers and yank it out, probably taking part of your jaw with it. Broken bow? They'll set it by feel and hope for the best, usually resulting in permanent deformity. Infected wound? Time for amputation, because antiseptics won't be invented for another century, and gangrene is a death sentence. But the real horror is that you'll be conscious for all of it. They'll give you a leather strap to bite down on, hold you down with brute force, and start cutting. The pain will be so intense that you'll pass out, which is actually the best case scenario because unconsciousness is the only escape from the agony. Many men died from shock during surgery, and the ones who survived often wished they hadn't. The infection rates for surgical procedures were nearly 100%, which meant that most operations were essentially death sentences with extra steps. The instruments were never sterilized, the operating conditions were filthy, and the surgeon's hands were probably covered in blood and dirt from the last patient. You were more likely to die from the treatment than from the original injury, but you didn't have a choice because doing nothing was also a death sentence. And remember, all of this is happening while you're trapped on a ship in the middle of the ocean, hundreds of miles from the nearest land. There's no calling for help, no emergency room to rush to, no trained doctors to consult. You're completely dependent on the dubious medical skills of a drunk sailor with a collection of rusty knives and a bottle of rum for anesthesia. The psychological impact of watching your crewmates die from these diseases is almost as devastating as the physical suffering. You'll see strong men reduced to skeletal wraiths, begging for death as their bodies consume themselves from the inside out. The smell of rotting flesh from gangrenous wounds will follow you everywhere, and you'll learn to sleep through the screams of men having limbs amputated in the next room. Every cough, every fever, every strange rash becomes a potential death sentence, and you'll spend your days wondering which disease will claim you first. The disposal of the dead becomes a routine part of ship life that would traumatize any normal person. Bodies are wrapped in canvas and thrown overboard with minimal ceremony, often before they're completely dead because nobody can spare the time or resources to determine exactly when someone has passed. You'll participate in these floating funerals dozens of times, watching former friends and enemies alike disappear into the depths, knowing that your own body will probably follow the same route soon enough. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect is the complete randomness of survival. The strongest, most experienced pirates would die from a simple infected cut, while sickly newcomers would somehow survive diseases that killed half the crew. There was no logic, no justice, no reward for good behavior or punishment for bad. Disease was the great equalizer that reminded everyone that death was always just one contaminated meal or infected mosquito bite away. Your fate was entirely in the hands of microscopic organisms that didn't care about your hopes, dreams, or desperate will to survive.